So this becomes one thing, and that's why it takes you all the way to awakening eventually. Well, that's quite interesting, and it's also something that you see under the Vedanupassana and Chittanupassana as well. They talk about all these mind states, the Niramisa Sukha, the Mahagata Chitta, Anuttara Chitta, the Vimutta Chitta. All of these things are things that are concerned stillness and samadhi and jhanas and all these things. So when we look at Satipatthana in a very broad context, it actually includes the jhanas and the samadhi practice. If you look at it more narrowly, which is the more standard view of Satipatthana, it is that which leads to jhanas. More broadly, it includes the jhanas. And because in that broader context, then it leads all the way to awakening here. Yeah, makes sense? So, and then of course you have that famous thing at the end, if you practice this only for 1 week, you're supposed to become awakened, right? People ask, is that true? How is that possible? How can it be the case? 1 week, I've been doing this for 7 years and still kind of, still trying my best to get there. And of course, it all depends on your starting point. If your starting point is that you're already practicing samadhi, you come from some other tradition or whatever, then these things can happen very fast. But if you had just been like released from the hell realm or something like that, then it's going to take a while before your mind kind of turns around, right? And you kind of get a skillful things to do. So it really depends on what kind of person you are here. So now that we have looked at the Satipatthana Sutta, I want to look at the Anapanasati Sutta. This to me is another another important sutta because it is really about the process of meditation itself. And just to repeat to you what is so powerful about this, and I haven't actually included that here, but what is so powerful about this sutta is that it says at the very end that by practicing in this way, you fulfill the 4 satipatthanas, right? This is all you have to do. Sit down and watch the breath. It's so easy, so simple. People think, oh, it's so hard to watch the breath, but it's not really hard. It's just that our mind isn't trained properly, and that's why it is difficult. The mind just goes away. But the idea of watching the breath is what could be more simple than that? The simplest thing in the world, right? Breathe in, breathe out. Am I doing it wrong? Am I doing it the right way? What am I? All of that is just really, it falls by the wayside once the mind is ready for these things. So very powerful, the fact that this is sufficient to fulfill and complete the 4 applications of mindfulness. And of course, if you fulfill and complete the 4 applications of mindfulness, the next thing is that you also fulfill and complete the 7 factors of awakening, which is also mentioned in this sutta. So mindfulness of breathing leads to the fulfillment of the satipatthanas, which leads to the fulfillment of the bojjhangas, the factors of awakening, which leads to liberation and vimutti and what is it? Vimutti and liberation and Panya, vimutti, anyway, it doesn't matter. It leads to vimutti, it leads to the highest liberation. Vidya vimutti, yeah, I think insight and liberation. I think vidya vimutti, I think might be the correct one. Anyway, so there you are. So that is why it is so interesting. This simple method, and it was used by the Buddha himself, a very simple method, actually takes you all the way to awakening. It's quite astonishing when you think about it. As long as you put the basic factors into place, first of all, this will take you all the way to the end of the path. And that's what it says here anyway. So let's just read it out. Because when mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, it is of great fruit and great benefit. When mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, it fulfills the 4 applications of mindfulness. When the 4 applications of mindfulness are developed and cultivated, they fulfill the 7 factors of awakening. When the 7 factors of awakening are developed and cultivated, they fulfill true knowledge, the vidya, and deliverance. So that's like what I translate as insight before, and deliverance, vimutti, the liberation from all the defilements, etc. Right, and this is the promise with mindfulness of breathing, and it is one of the reasons why I would say it is so important on the path as well, is because it is found in so many different places. In fact, there is even an Anapanasati Sangyutta, a collection of discourses just on Anapanasati found in the Sangyutta Nikaya, and there isn't that much to say about anapanasati. This is about it. So it's quite remarkable that there is a separate Sangyutta just for this kind of practice. So very important. I think it is the way of meditation that is kind of talked about the most in the suttas. Everything else seems to be less important. This seems to be number one. So, for that reason, I would say interesting and important. So, how is it done? And how, bhikkhus, is mindfulness of breathing developed and cultivated so that it is of great fruit and great benefit? Here, a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni or a lay person, lay disciple, right? Upasaka, everyone is really included in this. And it actually specifically says in the sutras that even the lay disciple, sometimes you should go away into seclusion and experience the bliss of seclusion for yourself. Right? So that was the instruction by the Buddha for everyone, including everybody. Here a bhikkhu gone to the forest or to the root of a tree or to an empty hut, sits down, having folded his legs crosswise, sets his body erect and established mindfulness in front of him. Ever mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. And you probably recognize this straight away. This is very similar to what we were looking at in the gradual training before, where it has this exactly the same phrasing as it has here. This idea of gone to the... Actually, there the phrasing was not exactly the same, because there it was talking about going to the charnel ground, a mountaintop, a ravine and all that. But it included the root of a tree and an empty hut. So this is like a contracted form of that. The idea of going into solitude, right, to the forest, empty hut, etc. And the rest of the phrase here is exactly the same as you found in the gradual training. Sitting down crosswise, setting your body erect, establishing your mindfulness in front of yourself.
That was before him. Establishing mindfulness before him. It was in front of him.
Okay, so there's just Bhikkhu Bodhi has changed his translations a little bit over the years, you know, so in front of him, before him, yeah. But I think the meaning is probably roughly the same. It's not kind of... I don't think there's a major difference in meaning there, I believe. And I think probably Bhikkhu Bodhi felt before him might be more clear perhaps, rather than in front of him. Not sure about that. Because before is perhaps more mental, right? Before you, whereas in front of has more a physical kind of sense perhaps. I don't know. Just a random observation on what the difference might be here. So it is exactly the same thing that we found in the gradual training. So it means that in the gradual training, after this, we had the removal of the 5 hindrances. And remember I said that that was all about meditation, all about satipatthana and mindfulness of breathing. And here is the proof of the pudding, just to show that my words are not entirely empty of meaning, but actually there is some truth to what I'm talking about. So this is kind of just establishing that fact, right? That there is a connection here between these things. So this is where mindfulness of breathing really happens. It happens when you are secluded. And this shows you that this is a very profound practice. It is a practice that you have already gone a long way on the path, you've gone a long way, purified your mind to a high degree, and only then are you really ready for mindfulness of breathing. Yeah. It is not an easy practice. Many of you have tried the mindfulness of breathing, and it's really can be really frustrating sometimes. And that is why it is so important to focus not on the result of the practice. The reasons why you get frustrated is because you're looking for the result. I want to watch the breath. I can't watch the breath. Oh, I'm going to give up meditation and become a Muslim instead. I've had enough of this. Right? Sometimes when you get really frustrated, that's kind of thing how you think sometimes. That is the wrong way, right? If you do that, you have really lost the plot and lost a massive opportunity in gaining the benefits of these wonderful teachings. So what you have to do instead, and this is so crucial on the path of meditation, is to enjoy whatever you have already. And everybody if you do it in the right way, will enjoy the meditation a little bit. At the very least, you can relax, right? We're running around all the time, and sometimes people get very stressed in this world. And I'm sure that in KL, people probably get quite stressed. I can imagine that's the case. So just being able to relax and sit back and enjoy, right? Oh, so nice to just closing your eyes. What I notice when I close my eyes is that I already, at that point, I'm shutting out so much of the world. Just closing your eyes and make you more peaceful. You know what I mean? Just that is quite nice already, because you're shutting out so much of the world. And then sitting there with closed eyes, allowing things to calm down, settle down, be less restless, less agitated, and all these kind of things. Enjoy every little step of the way. Don't worry so much about what you have to do, because the instructions are so simple. And the breath tends to come by itself when it is ready, or rather when you are ready, the breath just comes, and then you are doing breath meditation already. Keep it very simple, and if you feel that you have not making enough progress, then go back to the basics of sila, of developing your character. This is really often where it really is at. So it is a profound practice, so you can't expect it to be difficult, right? It is about going to the forest, sitting at the root of a tree, to an empty hut. You can't expect that it's not going to be straightforward and easy. And then you have the standard expression here of how the meditation happens: sitting down, legs crosswise, body erect, having established mindfulness in front of him. And this, I've already explained the meaning of this. I'm going to pass that by for now. And then the actual then, only when mindfulness is established, right? At that point, do you actually start watching the breath. First of all, mindfulness, then you get the breath awareness. And this is, of course, important, because it means a lot of the time people start watching the breath too quickly in the meditation practice. They sit down and they start watching the breath pretty much straight away. But if you do that, it's not going to work. Either you're going to feel tense because you are holding on to the breath too hard. And people are tense enough already. Don't need more tension, right? This makes it worse. We need to, much better to relax in meditation practice. So don't do that, because it just makes the meditation so terrible and awful and unpleasant and all these kind of things. Alternatively, what it does is that it makes your mind wants to rebel, because the mind doesn't want to be forced onto things, so it will rebel and it will go into all kind of areas. It will think about this, think about that, or rebel into sloth and torpor, right, and all of these things. And this is the other problem here. So the idea is always to establish that mindfulness, first of all, in a gentle, compassionate, kind way, whereby you have a nice perception of the environment and the people around you. You have a nice feeling for what is going on. You're feeling at ease, you're feeling relaxed. And if all the factors come together, mindfulness tends to arise. Because you're enjoying yourself. You're happy to be here. Yeah. You're happy to be alive, instead of being kind of miserable about life and these kind of things. And then it comes together. So that is the point where you start watching the breath. And this is where it says, ever mindful he breathes in, mindful he breathes out. And the little word here, ever, is eva in Pali. And eva has many different meanings. Eva can mean like, it can be an intensifier, which means like mindful all the time. Or eva can actually mean something else. It can mean that like just mindful, right? Just mindful he breathes in, just mindful he breathes out. And that is my preferred translation of this passage, just mindful, because at this stage you are not yet ever mindful. Ever mindful takes a while to develop. It doesn't happen straight away. But just mindful actually fits the context really well, because just mindful means you don't use any willpower, you don't use any force, you don't make these things happen. Instead, you sit back and you are just mindful. Yeah, so just mindful you breathe in, just mindful you breathe out. Sitting back, being aware, knowing what's happening, not trying to force your mind onto the meditation object. So it's tiny little change in translation, right? But it actually is, when you understand what's going on, it actually is quite meaningful. And these tiny little things can be the difference between understanding what you're doing and not understanding what you're doing. Yeah. So then comes, once you have started breathing in like that and breathing out, watching that, then comes the actual instructions. Breathing in long, he understands, I breathe in long. Breathing out long, he understands, I breathe out long. Breathing in short, he understands, I breathe in short. Or breathing out short, he understands, I breathe out short. So here, what is understands here is probably just a way of saying that you know, you are aware of what is going on. You are aware that the breath is either long or short. In other words, you have some degree of awareness of the breath. That is what this really is about. Yeah, so whether it is short or long, that's not really the point. The point is just that you are aware of the breath. You know what is going on. And it's interesting how here it goes from the long breath to the short breath. And this is one of the things that can be seen in meditation practice, that when you become more peaceful, the breath sometimes, first of all, it becomes long because you're relaxing, but then as your mindfulness improves, it actually sometimes becomes shorter because your breath becomes more shallow, because you're burning less calories and you're starting to relax. So there's actually less breathing going on sometimes. So first of all, you relax, the breath becomes long, and then it starts to become short as a consequence. And that, I think, is the why there is this sequence here. It does not mean that you should control your breath. There are certain systems of meditation where they argue that you should control the breath to be long first and then short and then calm and all these kind of things. But I personally don't think that is the right way at all to read this particular sutta. There's nothing here that says control. It just says knowledge and understanding. And knowledge and understanding is like a passive thing. You are receptive to what is going on rather than trying to control what is happening here. So that is a different way of looking at this. So all you're doing here is that you are allowing the breath to be whatever it is, and you have the awareness of that breath. And then it says, I train thus, I shall breathe in experiencing the whole body of the breath. He trains thus, I shall breathe out experiencing the whole body of the breath. He trains thus, I shall breathe in tranquilizing the bodily formation. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the bodily formation. So what is going on here? And here, what is happening here is a little bit ambiguous, because this idea of experiencing the whole body, sabba kaya patisangvedi, that's the Pali word for that, and it actually quite literally means experiencing the whole body. So it is not clear, what does it mean by body in this case? Does it mean the physical body? And in some meditation circles it is actually understood to mean the physical body. But I say in this case it means kaya in the sense of the breath body, the breath as a collection of all types of breath. That's called the breath body. And the reason I read it that way is because it says specifically in this sutta at the very end of it that the breath is one body among the bodies, right? So it specifically equates the idea of breath with body. And that's why I read it like that. And the other reason I read it like that is because this is anapanasati. It's mindfulness of breathing. It's not mindfulness of the physical body. Right? And when you do mindfulness of breathing, the whole purpose of this practice is to gradually calm down the breath and become more and more refined until you enter all the bliss states and all of these kind of things. So to me, it is natural that there is a natural sequence there of calming the breath rather than suddenly moving from the breath to the physical body and then back to the breath again or whatever. So these are my reasons for translating that way. There are other people who disagree with that, and that also fits with the commentarial tradition that also says that, and that is also the way Ajahn Brahm reads this. So I think there is some good precedence for reading that. Yes?
Chalmers also has it as body of the breath.
Body of the breath, yeah.
Chalmers is quite old, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the very earliest translations of the Majjhima Nikaya, that Chalmers, that's right. That was back in the... You know, from there, really. Have you got this translation? Have you? On soft copy, okay, that's pretty good. So you can see some of the old guys, they really had their act together. Some of the newer ones, they're not so good. So because that was back in the 1890s something, right? Lord Chalmers, exactly. Yeah, sounds like something out of the Victorian age. It probably was out of the Victorian age. Yeah. Okay, so that is Lord Chalmers taken into account as well. That's really good that we can branch out a little bit like that. And then the idea here, of course, by experiencing the whole body of the breath, means that your awareness is expanding, it's becoming more powerful. You see the breath in all its details. Instead of just knowing one thing about the breath, you just have the knowledge whether it's long or short, which doesn't take much awareness to be aware of that. It's only each breath, you kind of have to see it a little bit. Here you are expanding your awareness to see the whole breath, right? This is what this is about, the whole body of the breath, the whole thing as it moves and as it goes. So that is why you can see here that it changes a little bit here. Now it says he trains in this way. Before he says he understands. So I take this to mean that when you understand is because you're already mindful, so this is kind of natural at this particular point, but then to get to the next stage you actually have to practice quite a bit to get to that point. You have to allow the mind to settle down, to become peaceful. That's why a bit of training, if you like, is involved. It's not really training in the sense of using your willpower and forcing yourself and all of this kind of thing. It's just that you do the practice in the right way, and then this is the result of that. Yes?
This whole body of the breath, is it referring to the breath in the entire passage from going in until the abdomen?
Something like that, yeah. But it doesn't. I think the point though is not that you don't have to be aware of any particular place. It can just be a general disembodied awareness of the breath, right? So you know that the breath is going in, you know the breath is going out. You don't have to locate it anywhere. You just feel the breath going in and out. So that is how yeah. So because the thing here is that you have mindfulness in front of you. So often that is understood to mean that you are awareness of at the tip of the nose or your upper lip or something like that. That is kind of a standard way of doing mindfulness or breathing. But I think mindfulness in front of you, to me, is just an idiom that your mindfulness is present in the present moment. It's not actually all over the place. That is how I would understand that term. And that is fits also with how many other people regard that as well. But, always there's going to be some degree of differences on this. Depends how seriously you take the commentaries, how seriously you take your various teachers, how much you have read the suttas. There's all kind of reasons for why people interpret these things differently here. So, of course, I always believe that my interpretation is right, but so does everyone else, right? And that's the problem. We all think we're right, so that's kind of part of the problem here. So it's good to be a bit humble and realize the limitations one has, and then be open to being challenged as well sometimes. Because sometimes it's good, it's a sign of maturity that we are open to change our minds and to look at things differently. Otherwise it becomes a bit childish if we kind of cling on to our opinions just because of, being stubborn or whatever. So then we have the last one, and this is about tranquilizing the bodily formation. And bodily formation is the kaya sankhara. It's just another word for the breath. It's not sure why it is used in this way, but this is how it is used in the suttas. So what we're doing here is tranquilizing the breath. And again, it says that we train to do this. It doesn't mean that we put in a lot of effort, because if you put a lot of effort, you're doing the opposite of tranquilizing anyway. So what it means is that it just takes time to get to that point. So you have to relax, you have to do the meditation practice, and as you do that, the tranquilization happens all by itself. It's a natural process, right? All of this is a natural process. Once you have established mindfulness, once you're able to, because this is kind of the point of mindfulness, is that you're already standing back and just aware of things. You're not really involved with anything anymore. Right? When you get that beautiful state of mind, when you're just standing back, you're seeing things arising, hearing sounds coming, sounds going, mind states coming, mind states going. When you get to that point, it is actually quite peaceful, precisely because you're not involving yourself, you're not trying to control things. So the last thing you want to do here is to involve yourself again in trying to control. Because if you do that, you lose that beautiful mindfulness that is detached, that is kind of just aware of what is happening here. It's so nice, right? Usually we are so reactive to the things, to the world around us, and we kind of get upset for small things or whatever it is, and now suddenly you are standing back and nothing really touches you anymore. Not allowing yourself to be pulled around by your emotions because you are precisely standing back from things and just watching, observing the world for what it actually is. So notice that, because that is one of the beautiful things about mindfulness arising here, when you have that kind of standing back from things. So that is the tranquilization of the breath, and again happens automatically, and that those first 4 steps, they are called they are equivalent to the kaya nupassi in the Satipatthana Sutta, right? This is where you do the body contemplation. This is actually mentioned in this sutta, but it's further down. I've actually cut all that out to make it kind of reasonable. Otherwise we're talking about this sutta forever, and we haven't got forever because we want to get out of this samsara. So for that reason we had to kind of cut out a few things. But that's what it says there. So this is really the equivalent of the kaya-nupassana, the contemplation of the body. Right? What comes after contemplation of the body? Contemplation of feeling. So this is what I was saying, that the satipatthana is a gradual thing. You go from one satipatthana to the next one, going on and on and on. So here, what we're seeing next now is the contemplation of feeling based on mindfulness of breathing. Yeah. So this is what happens next. He trains thus: I shall breathe in, experiencing rapture, piti. He trains thus: I shall breathe out, experiencing rapture. He trains thus: I shall breathe in, experiencing pleasure, sukha. He trains thus: I shall breathe out, experiencing sukha. He trains thus: I shall breathe in, experiencing the mental formation, citta sankara. He trains thus: I shall breathe out, experiencing the mental formation. He trains thus: I shall breathe in, tranquilizing the mental formation. He trains thus: I shall breathe out, tranquilizing the mental formation. And here we have all these beautiful, beautiful mind states. And these are some of the things that we have been looking at before: the rapture, the piti, right? The pleasure, which here is sukha. The tranquilizing of things, which is the passaddhi on the path. All of these factors that actually make up, very similar to what we see in the bojjhangas. In the bojjhangas you have the piti sambojjhanga, you have the passaddhi sambojjhanga, and these are very similar to the things that you see here. So this is what is meant by the contemplation of feeling in the Satipatthana Sutta. It's pretty good news, isn't it? Contemplation of feeling means contemplating all of these beautiful things, being aware of all these marvelous things starting to arise in the mind. And this is what I said before: you don't actually have to contemplate so much the painful things, because once you get to the nice things on the Buddhist path, the painful things have already ceased. They're kind of in the past already. Don't have to worry about those. They are impermanent. So out they go. They are kind of, it's almost as if you have completed the cultivation of those once you come to the rapture and you come to the higher kind of feelings. So what is happening here is that as the breath becomes tranquilized in the previous, the 4th step previously, then there comes a point when the experience becomes so beautiful that you start to get this rapture and pleasure and joy kind of arising in the body. And this is what is meant by piti here, both the body and also in the mind at the same time. And sometimes these things can feel like this kind of coursing through the body of kind of a sense of pleasure in a sense. And it is described in the Visuddhimagga. It can take various forms depending on your personality and who you are. But essentially it is like a physical form of pleasure going through the body. It's a bit like the gladness that you can have sometimes when you just feel glad and you're happy about being alive and wow, everything is so wonderful and you feel that you're living your life well. But it's a bit more intense than that. A bit more intense in the sense that it's almost like a physical presence of happiness. So that comes naturally when the body becomes very peaceful and very calm, and you have a positive attitude to everything around you, and then suddenly these things start to arise. And at this point, life starts to become very, very nice. Actually, it's nice from the very beginning, from the moment you have mindfulness, but now it's getting really, really nice. You start to get a real feeling for where this path of meditation is going to take you. Right? It's kind of, these are called the niramisa sukha. The niramisa, the unworldly happiness is starting to happen at this particular point. And then the next one here is the experience of pleasure, which is sukha, sukha patisangvedi. And sukha is very similar to piti, except that it is maybe a little bit more tranquil normally. In other words, when you practice the piti, practice the breathing, you make it a bit more profound, then you experience the sukha. It's usually a bit more profound than the piti, but they're very closely related to each other, and very often they belong together. And then he has the idea here of the mental formation, experiencing the mental formation, and this again is very similar to the idea of experiencing the feelings that we have just seen. Mental formation in the sutras often is defined as sanya and vedana. So in other words, it is the perception that you have, including the vedana. So it basically is just another way of saying the same thing, but this time also including the vedana itself. And the main reason it's there is because of the next step, which is then tranquilizing that mental formation. You're already experiencing happiness, you're having piti and sukha, and now the idea is to tranquilize it, make it more peaceful, not so excited, right? It's already quite peaceful, but now you want to make it really, really peaceful. So here you can see Vedana Nupassana, the contemplation of Vedanas, contemplation of these positive feelings, moving towards more and more beautiful feelings as you do that. More and more peace, more and more powerful senses of happiness. And this is the kind of thing that ideally Anapanasati should give you, especially when you go on retreat. Certainly not everybody experiences these things, but there's always a minority of people who do get these kind of beautiful meditation experiences. So this is what is happening here, Vedana Nupassana. It's great, I love to read this out because it gives you this feeling of the power of the mindfulness of breathing, right? Such a simple thing, and it takes you through all of these stages of happiness and pleasure and tranquility and all of these kind of things. It's absolutely marvelous, as they say here. And this is only the beginning, right? We're nowhere close to the jhanas yet, still a long way to the jhanas. So this whole path has just so many beautiful aspects to it. So then comes the next one, and the next tetrad, we call them tetrads because there's 4 steps in each one. The next tetrad is all equivalent to the Chitta Nupassana, contemplation of mind states, or mind qualities. And the Chitta Nupassana goes as follows. He trains thus, I shall breathe in experiencing the mind. He trains thus, I shall breathe out experiencing the mind. So this is the first step here, experiencing the mind, right? What does that actually mean to experience the mind? And as I was saying, I think earlier on today, it is the idea that you have to kind of, to be able to see an object or to understand something, you have to extract it from its environment and look at it in isolation from everything else. So what is happening here is that the breath is becoming very tranquil, previously, including the feelings of the body, all that is becoming tranquilized. So this is the point where we are moving away from the body, moving away from the 5 senses, and moving into the world of the mind instead. Right? And you can see that shift happening in your meditation. The world of the senses and the breath, all that is gradually fading away more and more into the background. And there comes a point when you get like things like the samadhi nimitta. The samadhi nimitta is the word we often use for the kind of a light that can arise in the mind during meditation, a stable, powerful, blissful light that you might see as you meditate. And at that point, when you see that light, that is a sign that the mind is taking over. And I think sometimes in the sutras you have something called a chittassa nimitta. And chittassa nimitta means something like the sign or the mark or the object of the mind. So essentially that is where the mind becomes apparent and you're seeing the mental world rather than seeing the physical or the sensory world. So this is what I think the meaning is here. You're moving into the experiencing the mind. The physical world is being left behind. Breath is left behind, the sense is left behind, and all of that. And then, once you are coming to the experience of the mind, then you have to deal with that mind, to take that mind further. And the first thing it says here, he says that he trains thus: I shall breathe in gladdening the mind. He trains thus: I shall breathe out gladdening the mind. He trains thus: I shall breathe in stilling the mind. He trains thus: I shall breathe out stilling the mind. He trains thus: I shall breathe in liberating the mind. He trains thus: I shall breathe out liberating the mind. So here, what happens here is that when you start seeing the mind is initially, as everything else, is going to be a little bit coarse, right? When you start out, the nimitta may not be entirely stable, they might not be very shiny, it might be quite dull initially, and all of these kind of things. So what we're doing here is just staying with the meditation object. The breath may still be a little bit in the background, but it's really far away at this point, and you stay with this nimitta. And as you stay with the nimitta, and you allow it, just keep your attention on these things, you are gladdening it, right? Making it even more beautiful than it is already. And you think that you're going to die of bliss at some of these points, right? It's so blissful, you don't know what to do anymore. You don't know whether you should... You don't know what's happening. And this is one of those things that people often say who get into deep meditation for the first time. They just can't believe how much bliss there is. It's almost like they think they can't stand it anymore. They're going to explode or something because they're so happy. And that's kind of... It's kind of cool, right? To say, put it that way. It's kind of amazing that there is a path where there is so much happiness. You don't even know whether you can take all the happiness. It is kind of one of those miracles in the world. It's hard to believe until you actually get there yourself. And then, whoa, what am I going to do now? How can I handle all of this? And so this is what is happening here. You get all this gladness and you polish that mental nimitta up more and more. And then, of course, you keep on also at the same time stilling it, because there may be still some movement in the mind, a little bit of a disturbance in there. So you by keeping your attention on the object more and more and more, the focus becomes more and more clear, more and more powerful, more and more still. So you're stilling it as well, gladdening it and stilling it together. And eventually that gladdening and stilling it together, eventually it leads to what is here called the liberation of the mind. And at that point, the liberation of the mind in the suttas always means attaining one of the jhana states. Deep samadhi, bang, you go into a deep state of samadhi, and then you are liberated. And what you are liberated from at that point is the final, complete and full liberation from the body and the five senses, and also the full liberation from the five hindrances. Vivicheva kamehi, vivicha akusalehi damehi, it says at the entrance to the first jhana, which means just that, having become separated from the karmas. The karmas in plural means like the five senses. And the akusala dhamma, the unwholesome states or qualities, always refers to the five hindrances. Yeah, so this is what you are liberated from, and that's why the mind is liberated. And that's also why it's a bit scary, because you're making this jump from still having kind of a little bit of access to the five senses, a little bit access to the body, and now suddenly that access has been cut off completely, and you move in onto a completely different world. And that is why it is kind of a little bit at that point, if you, oh, am I ready to give this up, right? This is a bit scary. And then you take the jump and think, whoa. And then you go into your first experience of really deep samadhi for the first time. So that is the mindfulness of breathing. And it's such a beautiful sutta with so much power to it, so many exceptional states, right? And you can start to understand now why people talk about meditation experience as a positive trauma in your life. It's a positive trauma because it's hard to believe all the bliss, right, that is possible on this path. It's just bliss on bliss on bliss. But The biggest thing to remember about this, and this is, I think, a very important point, never to forget, is that all of this bliss, all of this happiness, all of this tranquility and the samadhi that you experience, it does not come without wisdom. It does not come without insight. Sometimes you hear people saying, oh, samadhi without wisdom or samadhi without insight. But it's impossible. You will have noticed as we're talking about this, we're gradually giving up things. The only way you can give something up is by having insight into it in the first place. If you are going to enter a first jhana, it says in the sutras quite literally, you have to have suditta, the karma. Suditta means having seen well, right, with right wisdom, sammapanyaya. You have to have seen the sensual pleasures and the five senses. If you haven't understood them properly in this way, you cannot enter the first jhana. It's impossible. It is right there, black on white, in the sutras, in a few places. And it makes sense, because to abandon something, the only way you can abandon something is to understand that it is a disturbance, it is a problem, it is something that you have to put aside so you can reach a higher level on the Buddhist path. So for every step you're going through here, there's also wisdom with every step. There's no such thing as pure samadhi without wisdom. There's no such thing as pure wisdom without samadhi. Somebody asked yesterday, but what about the sutta where you talk about first vipassana and then samatha? And that is a valid point, but that is a relative thing. There's maybe a little bit more on the wisdom side and a little bit more on the samadhi side, but both always have to go together to a very high degree here. Yeah, and this is what we're seeing, and this is what we're seeing especially in the last tetrad, the last four factors here. We come to understand what is going on here. So the last one is then as follows. He trains thus, I shall breathe in contemplating impermanence, anicca. He trains thus, I shall breathe out contemplating impermanence. He trains thus, I shall breathe in contemplating fading away. This is viraga. He trains thus, I shall breathe out contemplating fading away. He trains thus, I shall breathe in contemplating cessation, nirodha. He trains thus, I shall breathe out contemplating cessation. He trains thus, I shall breathe in contemplating relinquishment, patinissagga. He trains thus, I shall breathe out contemplating relinquishment. Yeah, so what is this all about? Contemplating impermanence. Exactly how do you contemplate impermanence at this stage? What is it that you're doing? And what you are doing is that when you come out of a nice experience of samadhi, after having practiced the mindfulness of breathing, you think back on your experience and you see those things that have become impermanent, right? Those things that have changed, those things that have moved around as you go through this experience of the breath. You see things becoming less important, the body is fading away, the five senses are fading away, the five hindrances are fading away, certain feelings are disappearing, other feelings are arising. You look at that process and you can see the impermanence in that process. This is not just some kind of thinking about impermanence in a kind of without a real object. This is not just a contemplation about the seven suns or anything like that. This is a much more specific type of contemplation where you take your real experiences and you look at those and you see them for what they are. Yes, and here you see the typical way that insight happens in Buddhism. It doesn't happen so much while you are meditating, it happens afterwards. When you come out of that meditation, that is when the insights really happen. And this is another interesting point. And it is what comes out of this is the idea that samatha and then vipassana, the afterwards, or the wisdom perhaps, takes that experience of samatha as its object, and then you understand what is going on here. And the same thing with viraga. Viraga is very similar to the idea of anicca. Viraga means fading away. And this is one of the main things that you see in meditation, how things are fading away and disappearing, right? One thing after the other. And you see how pleasant it is, how delightful it is, how wonderful it is when things are fading away. Sometimes we are so scared of things fading away because it seems like part of who we are is actually fading away. And that's true. It's not actually part of what we are, it's part of what we take ourselves to be that is fading away here. We are mistaken about that. All of this stuff actually got nothing to do with us. And then when it fades away, we think, wow, that's really neat, that's really nice, that's really wonderful when it all fades away. Let more fade away, right? That's how we think. Let it all fade away eventually. And the more fades away, the more happy you are, the less there is of you to cling on to, and the less kinds of sense of self you have. And everything starts to fit together. You start to understand how all of this works. Yeah, more bliss, more happiness, more things fading away, less of you there. Okay, less of me means more happiness. Okay, let's have even more less of me. No, let's have even less of me, or however you actually say that. So then you really start to get an insight into what Buddhism is all about. Why suffering, why impermanence, why non-self, why all of these things go together, why they are part and parcel of the same type of insight. Things fade away, you feel more happy. That must have been suffering. It must have been non-self because it is gone. Right? It was definitely impermanent because it has disappeared. Yeah, it all fits together in a very beautiful way. And you start to get this feeling that the more I let go of, the more I release, the more I kind of don't hold on to, the more stuff disappears, the better it is. Yeah, this is what this path is about. And the next one, viraga fading away, then leading into nirodha, which is the cessation of things disappearing completely. And then it's when you really start to understand all this non-self business and all of these things. And then eventually that insight becomes stronger and stronger. You do the same thing again and again and again. And eventually it becomes so clear to you that you get to relinquishment, patinissagga. And the idea of relinquishment is that you give up craving for these things, right? That is what relinquishment is really about. You give it up completely. No more interest in these things whatsoever. You are craving, attachment, you relinquish it, you know that it is not mine, so you give it up completely. That is relinquishment. It's like when you do an act of generosity, you relinquish the food to the monks this morning, right? Okay, relinquish. You don't go back and take it back again, it's mine, right? That would be kind of considered rude in Buddhist circles if you did that. So in the same way, you relinquish all this stuff, and it's gone. And you don't actually pick it up again. That's what relinquishment is. No more craving, no more attachment, no more sense of me and I, gone. And that is kind of where we are moving towards the state of the Aryans, the noble ones, the stream enterers, the Arahats, and all of those. But not the Bodhisattvas, right? The Bodhisattvas haven't got this yet. They are still kind of struggling to get there. Okay, so that is mindfulness of breathing for you. And the Buddha says at the very end, bhikkhus, that is how mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated so that it is of great fruit and great benefit. So, any questions about this? Anyone wants to, Anyone thinks mindfulness of breathing is not a good idea? Yeah, lie?
Bhante, why is it that it is not start with, let's say, the mindfulness of breathing is cultivated, then developed?
Counting the breath?
Yeah.
That was it? Okay.
Yeah, because here it's saying developed first and cultivated. Isn't it the other way around?
Or developed and cultivated?
Yeah.
So what is the question?
The question is, you cultivate first, then you develop.
Okay, I see. I think the point is just that the Pali works with synonyms, lots of synonyms in Pali, words that mean roughly the same thing. Because this is an oral tradition, and in oral tradition, if you use lots of synonyms, it stabilizes the language because you know exactly what is meant. If you use only one word, it can easily be disrupted and misremembered, and then the whole thing falls apart. But if you have many synonyms like that, it stabilizes the oral tradition. So I don't think what is meant is not that you go from one to the other one. They are basically the same meaning. The meaning is basically the same for those two things. It's yes. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Bhante, just doing breath meditation correctly can lead to liberation.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. That's right. It's good news, isn't it? It's all you have to do. Whoa! sounds easy, yeah. It's really nice to get some simple instructions for once. Yeah, you have to have a good heart. Yeah, good heart. You have to have a good heart. That's number one. Number two, watch the breath, and you're finished. Yeah. Sila, that's a good heart. That's the good heart, right? Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Ajahn, so the mindfulness of breathing, it fits in with the right mindfulness section.
Yeah.
That's the seventh factor, right?
Yes. Yes.
So it seems that we've already hit the jhanas within the seven factors, and the jhanas are always kind of associated with the eighth factor. Right, samadhi. So is there something extra in Sammasamadhi that's not in here?
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, thanks.
Or is there like some overlap?
Thank you for bringing that up, because that was I should have talked about that a bit more. I think it's just that it depends. I think samma sati, in a narrow sense, is that which leads to samma samadhi, right? In a narrow sense. But sometimes you see that these factors work so closely together, you can't really pull them apart from each other. So in a broader sense, you can argue that samma sati and samma samadhi kind of work together as a whole. But if you're going to cut these things up, I would say yes, sammasati is just the mindfulness of breathing that goes up to the first jhana, and from there on it's called sammasamadhi. Yeah? So you can see that the 12th factor there is the vimochayang chittang, is the 12th one, liberating the mind. And vimochayang chittang is just that, the very last thing you do when you're doing mindfulness of breathing, then it goes on to the jhanas afterwards. So because these things are so intertwined with each other, you cannot really separate them entirely, and sometimes you have to speak about them together like that. Yeah, I think that's all that's going on there. Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Anything is unclear? Everybody absolutely clear? Yeah.
Yeah, I just have an observation regarding, let's say when you meditate in Anapanasati, as you meditate, you're saying that you just don't do anything but relax and see the breath. Okay? As you see the breath, you also don't do anything, just see the breath.
Yeah.
Okay? I liken this to be like when you go for a movie, you just see the movie without making any comments, you just see the movie. After the movie, then you talk with your friends and start commenting, during this movie, what happened? So it is just like, after the meditation, you start to reflect back in that meditation, the impermanence and all this. So it is
excellent. Yeah. It's always good to make up your own little similes, because then you feel like you understand what's going on, right? Yeah. No, it's true. True. Yeah. Simile of the movie. Yeah. You can write a sub-commentary line, a sub-commentary line. That would be really nice. Always new things being. Yeah. Great. You can write it in English and then get somebody to translate it into Pali. That'd be really that'd be really nice. Okay. Let's have a break, everyone, and come back again. Is there something else? No. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
The crawling sensation.
Yeah.
Is it when you feel it?
Okay. Yeah. Crawling. These are just sensations that you have when you do meditation practice, and it's very common to feel kind of various kind of things, because when the body is relaxing, you're going into a sphere you don't usually go to. It's very, very common for people to have different kind of sensations in the body here.
So does it mean that you are calming down?
Maybe not. Yeah. What you have to do is that you have to check your mind state, right? And if your mind state is right, you're calming down. Don't worry about the sensations. They're unreliable. You cannot know what they're saying here. Just feel, if your mind is in a good place, you are doing well. If your mind is in a bad place, that's when you have to be a bit careful. Yeah. That's usually how it works. Okay.